Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Barbarian Banter. I'm your host Jonas Kilker, and today we have a very special episode because as you are watching this, Dane and I are currently traveling by horseback through the Eurasian steppe. And I am filming this before we leave. Dane is currently on the plane right now, rocking his Sea People summer merch, as I am as well. The episode that you're about to watch comes from Patrick Saltykov's The Warrior Philosopher Podcast. He was gracious enough to host us on his podcast. It was an incredible conversation. We mostly talked about the Sea Peoples and what Sea People summer is, but I really wanted you guys to be able to see this podcast because I thought there was a lot of really good stuff in there. And also, Dane and I selfishly did not have enough time to record enough episodes to make sure that they were coming out every Sunday as we were traveling for the next month or so. So I really hope that you guys enjoy this episode. Please make sure to subscribe not only to our podcast, but to Patrick's as well at The Warrior Philosopher. And if you have not yet, please make sure to go check out the Sea People Summer merch that we have created in collaboration with our friend, the Greek artist Nikephoros Danampasis. He is an incredible graphic designer and he made this beautiful design. It came out perfectly, in my opinion. We highly recommend that you cut the sleeves off. But without further ado, please enjoy this podcast featuring myself, Dane, and Patrick Saltykov.
Salvete Legionaries. I'm joined today by two very, very special guests. One you have seen before on the podcast, that being the Great Dane. However, we have another very, very special guest with Jonas Kilker. You might have seen him with the Great Dane on Barbarian Banter. Excellent podcast to be watching recently, but it's good to have you here, Jonas. Would you be willing to introduce yourself to the Legionaries?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Patrick. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Jonas Kilker. I, like Dane, make history, philosophy, mythology, content, kind of just anything in the realm of the humanities. I've always sort of had like an interest in history and stories and just sort of anything that's like not a hard science. Going through school, I kind of always detested the idea of there being an answer to everything and everybody just gets the same answer on the test and then like we all just fucking memorize shit and move on. It never really appealed to me, so I never really liked school. And then when I graduated high school, my life at that point had been mostly punk rock music and skateboarding, and I just thought I was gonna like work in the trades for the rest of my life. So that's what I started doing out of high school. I got a job firefighting. And then while I was firefighting, I decided wildland firefighting, I should clarify. I decided I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. Something was just calling me towards something higher, and I didn't really know what it was, but I knew that I wanted to work for myself. I knew that I wanted to work in something creative and sort of share ideas. And so that led me to go back to college. I started taking community college classes at my local community college once I got home. And I was majoring in history. And then I took a philosophy class and I just fell in love with philosophy. It was like it was everything that I was always looking for growing up, you know. Also around that time discovered Jordan Peterson and got really into the idea of like it's okay for your life to be meaningful and to sort of take yourself seriously so life doesn't feel as heavy, if that makes sense. And it was like the whole world just kind of cracked open for me and it became my most intense passion and drive was to just learn more about philosophy, which led to learning more about history. And I ended up getting some pretty good grades at my community college. I transferred to UCLA and got a bachelor's degree in philosophy with a minor in history. And as soon as I graduated, I had all of this sort of energy that I had been putting towards writing papers and didn't have anywhere for them to go. So then I started making TikToks 1 month later. And here we are today. That's what I've been doing ever since.
That's super cool. I didn't know that you were one, a firefighter, and two, also majored in philosophy. I'm currently getting my bachelor's in philosophy. I made the, I always tell people I made the career-ending decision to go with philosophy.
It's so funny because like everybody, you know, when I was in college, you know, everybody does the, oh, where are you from? And then what's your major, you know, kind of thing. And I would always tell people at parties, at the grocery store, whatever, they're philosophy. And the one of two reactions that you get is either like, oh, why, or, oh, that's so cool, I wish I could do that. And I'm like, you can. You're allowed to choose philosophy. You just don't, because you think that if you don't, no offense, Dane, get a business degree, then like you're not going to be able to get a real job, And maybe there's some, I never really got a real job after that. I just waited tables while I was doing TikTok, and now with the power of YouTube and Instagram and all that stuff, I'm full time in content creation now. So it worked out for me, but I can't say the same for every other philosophy major.
Yeah, I'm going to try to see if I can do the academic route, but we'll see what happens there. Obviously, it's a little bit stultifying at times, and
Dude,
there's
yes.
a lot of bureaucracy, right? As I'm sure you've experienced.
That's the one reason that I was steered away from it. My professors all talked me out of it. I was going around. I had great relationships with all of them, the history professors included, because I was even thinking like maybe I want to get a PhD in history instead. I don't know. And they all were like, oh, yeah, like I'll write you a paper, but please don't apply for grad school. Like you're going to ruin your life. Like I was acting at the time. I've been also working as an actor for the last 6 years. And they were like, dude, pursue your dreams. Like, don't fucking give. And I'm like, well, no, I'm not like giving up. Like, I love academia. I love philosophy and it. And they're like, please do something else. And I'm like, all right, if you say so. So I think it was a good decision on their part, but I know that I still have some people who will write letters if I need them.
There we go. Hey, who knows? Maybe we'll all make an academic turn, and we'll philosophy max awesome. in the universities. And before I ask Dane a question, because I don't want to leave you out, I did want to ask you one more question, Jonas. Sure. Who's a philosopher you've come across that isn't really common? Because we all know, we all love Nietzsche. Some of us like Hegel. I would say I'm kind of in the middle on Hegel, but like, who's a philosopher who's kind of maybe a little bit less covered that you've discovered through your time studying philosophy that you appreciate?
Oh, one of the most interesting philosophers I ever studied, and one that I wrote a few papers on, and had never known their name before attending UCLA, is Hannah Arendt. She is an existentialist philosopher who was mostly inspired by Heidegger, but she sort of has like a lot of roots in sort of like ancient Greek, and I guess you could say Aristotelian philosophy that sort of bled through Heidegger and his work. And she's like really fascinating. She wrote this book called The Human Condition. Is that right? Yeah, The Human Condition. And it's essentially a work on how it reminds me a lot of like what Evel is doing in Revolt Against the Modern World. She's talking about like why we have come to this place in society, but she doesn't really attribute it to anything so spiritual like Evel does. It's more so to do with like how we have sort of turned away from what once made a functioning society with people who are like genuinely good leaders, a philosopher king, as Plato would call them, and just like how that's denigrated over time. And she mostly blames communism, but it's a pretty interesting read.
And for those that don't know, Hannah Arendt and Heidegger carried on a little bit of an affair back in, I forget the name of the university that he was teaching at.
I did not know that.
Yeah, they had this affair, and he was like 35 and she was like 18 or something. Yeah, nobody's safe from the Heidegger.
Yeah, because I always thought she was like a student of his, but that totally makes sense.
She was a student. Yeah, well, she was a student of his. Yeah,
amazing.
Just he didn't exactly follow the HR guidelines that may not have put in place. But no, Hannah Arendt's super interesting, and I think there's a lot of Straussian sort of overlap with the things that she's going into, and of course Strauss, Heidegger, Arendt are all kind of coming from a similar space, I guess, in German philosophy at the time. But I don't want to leave Dane out. So Dane, I actually wanted to ask you, how did you and Jonas end up like meeting and starting to collaborate?
Yeah, so we both posting on TikTok, kind of in the same niche, if you will, right? Mythology, philosophy, history, storytelling. And I think, I can't remember the first time like we actually interacted online. I think he commented on a post of mine, or I commented on a post of his, you know how that goes. And we started, following each other, liking each other's stuff and all that. And then Jonas was doing a live, and I happened to hop on, and he was in my city, just by coincidence, an acting gig. It was an acting gig, right? That took you out here.
Yeah, I was shooting a commercial for this hotel, and I just happened to be in Vegas for literally one night. And that night I was just like bored, had nothing to do. They closed the pool at 5 p.m.
Yeah, which is
So after 6 p.m. I had dinner, I went back to my room. I'm like, what do I do? So I just went on live for like 2 hours, and Dane hopped on there.
Yeah, and then he was like, hey, I'm in town, want to meet up? And I was like, screw it, sure. So after work, I came, I picked him up, we hung out, filmed some content, and then I took him to the airport. So it was just a few hours, but that was like,
it's
kind of
we
cool.
literally had like a 3-hour window. I wrapped shooting at 5. My flight was at 8:30, and he was like, I'll be there at 5. I was like,
yeah, it kind of worked perfectly. It was one of those things, I'd never met another creator, so it was like, are they going to be what they like on? It's always like you have that question.
There's always that risk.
But yeah, Jonas was obviously super cool. So that started like our actual friendship, and just since then we got closer. And then obviously we started our podcast together, and then I saw him again. He hosted me before he moved recently in California. So I drove out, saw him, spent the weekend, and we filmed a ton of stuff. And
including a vlog, which is now live on YouTube.
Yes. We got a vlog in, and now we're obviously going to Kyrgyzstan together. So it's kind of funny how that all works out. It starts off with a comment on a video, and then next thing you know, we're going to be on horseback for 10 days.
Yeah.
Living the steppe lifestyle.
The serendipitous thing, like, because literally I just went on live and you happened to pop on. And at the time, I was still just a fan of Dane's. I had like just hit 10,000 followers or something like that. No. Maybe I had a little bit more of a following by then. But yeah, he just happened to pop on my live like 30 minutes before I ended it. And I was like, no way, like, Dane, jump on this live right now. Because I was such a huge fan at the time. And then and he just DM'd me, and he was like, I just got out of the shower. I'm not going to jump on live. But what are you doing in Las Vegas? Like, that's super cool to see you here. And then that's when we lined everything up. But just like, what are the odds of that? Like, there was no reason for that to happen. And who would have known if we would have started a podcast and, done all these things? I'm in the same circles, but it was originally Dane who was like, yo, Rogue's looking for people to go to Kyrgyzstan. Are you down to do this? And I'm like, fuck. So it's just insane how many opportunities are just like completely by the will of the gods. Like, you just have no say in what's going to happen, and some things are fated.
You do have the say of taking
the action.
Yes. When the opportunities present itself, definitely 100%. A big believer that fate will guide you and give you the opportunity, and you just have to buck up and take it when it's there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And hopefully I'll be with you for the next Kyrgyzstan trip. Rogue was trying to get me to go on, but I just got a lot to do. I'm not coping. I got a lot of stuff to do.
It's
life happens, but hopefully I'll be able to join you guys in the future. But speaking 100%. Of serendipitous sort of things, I kind of had a similar thing with how I ended up meeting Nick Land, where he had his debate with Dugan, and I had randomly commented on the debate. I mean, that it was a post by Oren McIntyre, and I was like, it'd be interesting if Nick Land, Jason Georgiani had a talk. That's all I said. And then Nick Land responds to it and said, I'm a big fan of your channel, love your videos, would love to talk sometime. I was like, holy shit. I was like, I'd love to have you on my podcast, post him on my podcast. And then I got really, really lucky that when he ended up doing his trip to San Francisco, one of the guys who was hosting him hit me up and was like, are you in San Francisco? I'm like, I'm not in San Francisco. Why? He's like, because Nick Land is going to be at my house on so-and-so day. We're having dinner. I was like, I'm going to fly out there. I will be there. And then Nick and I got to meet, which was super cool. So it's a similar thing. It's just those little occurrences.
Those little moments. Just say yes to things, man. Just say yes. Just do it. Like, if you have the resources, if you've got the balls, just do it.
Absolutely. So I'm with you all there. Really quick before we go further, I gotta pee again. I'm sorry. I've been chugging the Ceylon tea here, man. I don't know what it is. The caffeine, it's going right through me. So
yeah, no worries, bro.
I'll be right back. I'm gonna pause this. So besides barbarian-maxxing, one of the topics today, of course, you guys have been talking about the Sea Peoples a lot recently. And of course, one of the great things about the Sea Peoples is how little we know about them. And there's a great deal of mystery. And you've probably been seeing the memes with the Odyssey film that came out recently. There's all these Sea People memes.
We've been making them.
There we go. So maybe we can illuminate to the legionaries a little bit of what actually went on and what we do know about the Sea Peoples. So if either of you wants to go first and kind of introduce who the Sea Peoples were and what they did in history.
Yeah.
Well, suppose I can tee up a little bit. Because, the whole meme with the Sea Peoples is we knew nothing about them. They showed up, destroyed a bunch of stuff, and then disappeared. And that's kind of the meme. But we actually...
And left very small of a trace. That's the thing, is they left just enough of a trace for us to be like, what happened here? Without knowing really anything about them.
And... We do know more than the meme might let on, but the funny thing is, the more you learn about something in history, the more that you don't know. It's kind of like the light, right? Like the greater light you shine in the darkness, the more you realize how large the darkness is. So with the Sea Peoples, basically everything we know comes from the Egyptians, because the Egyptians were one of the few peoples who resisted them successfully and integrated them, and the pharaohs ordered depictions of the event and everything, and that's basically all we have in terms of actual written records. Everything else we have to piece together from archaeology, what was going on in the Bronze Age Aegean, genetics, all that sort of thing. And Jonas can kind of talk more about the genetics, what we know about where they might have come from.
I love genetics. So one of the kind of more fascinating things is that when the Sea Peoples, the terminology was first invented, I believe in the 18th century or early 19th century, by archaeologists who had recognized that there had just been widespread destruction within a 50 to 100 year time period throughout the eastern Mediterranean. And there's like Dane said with Egypt, all these depictions of these peoples who don't look anything like the Egyptians. They don't have the same armor. They don't have the same hairstyles. They even depict their beard styles differently, just to show how differently they looked. Swords, weapons, all these things, and showed them on these ships arriving from the sea. And so that's where because we weren't able to trace these to these were just the Trojans, these were the Sardinians. They called them the Sea Peoples because it was such a wide confederation of people. And then slowly over time, we were able to piece together from the Egyptian inscriptions from pharaohs like Ramses, I believe, some of the names like the Sheridan, and we were able to tie them to the peoples of Sardinia and the Nuragic civilization from there. The Ahiawa, which they linked to the Achaeans of Mycenaean Greece, because the Hittite kingdom, who was also fell during the Bronze Age, they also had inscriptions of the Ahiawa, of the people from across the Aegean. So we know that those are the Mycenaeans, and on, and just making all these connections. And what's the most fascinating, I think, is and I've made a couple videos about this myself, is the connection to proto-Celtic civilization that may have influenced the Sea Peoples era in history more than anything, because when we're looking at the Bronze Age and the Bronze Age collapse specifically, we're not really sure whether to call the Sea Peoples the cause of the collapse or just a symptom of the greater collapse that was already occurring. And what would that collapse even be? Because when a civilization falls, it's usually due to food shortages, trade disruption, just basically the systems that were in place fall apart. One of the easiest ways for that to happen is when sea raiders are destroying all the trade routes and you're not able to get resources from different places. And we know, for example, the people in Greece were trading with people in the Baltic and Nordic countries. And there was also some trade going on in Central Europe as well, because of the sword types that were coming into Mycenaean Greece at the time, because of the fact that they have amber, which comes from Scandinavia. and all these things. We know that they were super interconnected, but then there seems to be like a halting of all of these things. And it arises around the same time as the Urnfield culture started coming into prominence. And then you see all these Urnfield style pieces of weaponry, armor, like plate armor, which you also see in the Egyptian inscriptions and depictions of the Sea Peoples. And also the way that they bury their dead. They were called the Urnfield because they would cremate and then they would put them in urns and they would bury the urn in like a shallow grave. Previously, they were just burying people. So seeing this different style, this is like one of the things that comes up in Homer. People, they're like, oh, but they buried their dead. Why are they depicting them being cremated, you know? And it's like, because this was a proto-Celtic, you could say Indo-European tradition that arrives in Mycenaean Greece around that time and became the dominant aristocratic warrior culture. So with all that being said, we have this idea that these Urnfield peoples, these proto-Celts, are influencing the peoples in Greece. And then you have things like the Dorian invasion, and then you have the Trojan War, all these things happening at the same time. And then it just kind of makes the picture start to make a lot more sense. You know, the Urnfield culture pushing down the other tribes, those tribes going across the sea and raiding, and maybe they were even a part of the Sea Peoples themselves. The most interesting aspect, like Dane mentioned when it comes to the genetics, is the introduction of the R1b haplogroup into places like the Levant and the Egypt, which never have existed before the Bronze Age collapse. And then all of a sudden you see this like spike in R1b genetics that shows up right around that time. And then within 2 generations, completely dies off. So it's like they came in, had 1 generation of children, and then it's like they were just completely either pushed out of the population, didn't assimilate, or something like that. And then the R1b is like less than 1% today or something like that. But at the time, you could have seen it upwards of like 25-30%. And so that just lends to the mystery, is like, why did they just came, conquered, and then literally got back on the ship and dipped?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Couple things to play off there. One, that's where you kind of get into conjecture, right? Like we do know leading up to the Bronze Age collapse, there was an increase in sea raiding. Tomb raiding actually was pretty prominent, the raiding of burials. We even find like Golden Age of piracy pirates, they buried their treasure. And these might not, this was still kind of before Sea Peoples, but it kind of is, they bleed into the Sea Peoples, right? Because it's right prior. And we see an increase of mercenaries in Mycenaean Greece, coming from the north, even as far north as the Baltics, as Scandinavia. Mercenary groups increase in power as aristocratic warriors classes decline. And we can kind of see that again as either a symptom or a cause of collapse as conditions get worse, trade routes get raided. And of course, Bronze Age trade was very delicate because it required, I think it's tin and copper. And these materials came from all across Europe. And if you lose access, especially to tin, you can't make more bronze. So that creates a scarcity very quickly. So there's
thanks to the Urnfield culture disrupting the trade routes into the Balkans.
Exactly. And you've got all these people that were probably, some of them were soldiers, some of them were probably raiders already. And they had ethnic cores, but you kind of see all these people from across Europe get the same idea around the same time of the Middle East and North Africa look pretty sweet compared to where we are right now. Let's go try to take their stuff. And it's funny, like some of them, the city of Ugarit, there's an inscription where it's like, yo, can you help us? We see these guys on ships, and then the city's just destroyed. But the Egyptians were actually
famous last words.
And they incorporated some of the Sea Peoples into their military as advisors and bodyguards. And they also might have settled the Philistines in the Levant. The Philistines being connected to, is it the Pelasat peoples? And that's where you kind of see that spike of, is it R1A or R1B?
R1B, the Western European haplogroup. And even more specifically, it was like R1B 152, something like that. But it was one that was specifically tied to the proto-Celtic sort of territories in Iberia, like Spain and Portugal in that area, which opens up even another can of worms, because it's like, okay, not only were these people coming from all over Europe with the presence of the R1b haplogroup, but even perhaps from as far west as Spain and Portugal, which is just like incredible. And if that's the case, there's nothing really stopping, say, a Brittonic Celt from the British Isles sailing down to Spain, Portugal, being around there at the time, and then sort of getting caught up in all of this. Like, we don't really know, you know? It's all possible, especially when like something crazy like that comes out. It's like, okay, so the possibilities are really endless here. I mean, like, you have a fully Scandinavian like Rus Viking man who has like the I haplogroup from Sweden on an island in Cyprus in like 1205 or something. It's just mind-blowing. Like, they were trading, but they were also like, they were living there and fighting there. And I think he even had like a warrior's grave or something like that. So it's just kind of insane how far they reached. We don't realize how interconnected it was.
And I think because there's so little written for sure in history, I think we have to look to other time periods to kind of get an idea of what might have happened. You know, there's the Germanic migrations during the fall of Rome. There's the Viking Age, the Golden Age of piracy, even the Crusades. Obviously, the Sea Peoples, it wasn't like a unite under one religion, go fight in the Holy Land, but the same idea of all these warriors who, for environmental pressures, needed to go plunder, they needed to go fight or resettle or whatever the case. And they all kind of were like, hey, this area looks pretty juicy. Let's go raid, fight, conquer, pillage, whatever the case down there. So I think you kind of have to look at what happens in other periods of history to kind of shed some light on what could have been the reasonings and how this unfolded. And that's why I think it's like, okay, now we know some of the archaeology and the genetics, but it's like, we don't know, for example, the story of a Sea People king. We don't know their names. Yeah. We don't know their personal story the way we might a Germanic chieftain. We know about Alaric. He comes in. We know where he was born. We know he served in the Roman army. We know he eventually sacked Rome and brought in his Visigoths, all these things. We don't know that level of detail with the Sea Peoples, unfortunately, but we can make educated guesses about what their lives might have been like, which I think is just fascinating.
Yeah.
So if it's not one predominant ethnic group, can we fairly say that the Sea Peoples were really just the friends we made along the way?
Yeah, no, I think that's quite literally what it is. And what's so interesting with Christopher Nolan's movie and like tying in this idea of the Sea Peoples very heavily into the Odyssey, which in the original poems by Homer is just kind of like a blip of a mention, maybe, like it's kind of even conjecture in his time. And also because they're not so far removed from it. Homer's writing like in the 8th century BC, so he's only like 400 or 500 years at most in front of these things. So it wouldn't have necessarily been like the clearest hindsight of like, yes, the Sea Peoples that devastated, and guess what? It was us. It was also us, that kind of thing that Nolan really harped on. He's not really wrong. He's not wrong at all. And that's kind of one of the weird the things that I think the like history bros are either really impressed by or really upset by, because it's like, yeah, what did you expect him to do with the Sea Peoples thing? Did you want to see accurate Sea Peoples ships with like the duck faces on each side? It's like, no, you're gonna get Viking ships, of course. But the fact that it's even included is kind of like a cool little nod.
And I think it's kind of corny the way they say it, where it's like, are you the Sea Peoples?
Yeah.
And it's like kind of sidebar, reminds me of that SpongeBob episode where he's like the hall monitor and he's looking for himself and he's like the wanted poster. Yeah. That's kind of like the plot of Nolan's Odyssey. It's like,
it's exactly.
And then finally at the end, he realizes it's like, I was the sea person all along. I'm collapsing the Bronze Age.
Yeah, by my own hand.
But I guess in a broader sense, corny dialogue aside, Yeah, they kind of were at least the beginnings of the sea peoples. And I think even in the Odyssey, kind of like Jonas mentioned, by Homer's time, there's mention of raiding as far as Egypt. And that might be conjecture by the time Homer's writing.
Homer even
these
says that
stories, but-
Odysseus and his men raided on the way home, the Cicones. I think it's supposed to, I have no idea, but I think it's supposed to be like a transliteration of like the Cyclades in Greece, the islands like throughout the Aegean. And Odysseus on his way back to Ithaca from Troy just starts raiding all these cities and islands. And that's just kind of like a normal, like regularly understood thing. Even after he reclaims his throne in Ithaca, in order to restore his wealth, it says that he goes out on raids. And so it's like he's quite literally a person in a ship with a band of men just taking shit. It's like he's a pirate. He's a sea person. He is.
And I'm curious about, so I guess based on the time period, it would be like what, around 1100 to 1200 BC that the sea peoples were largely active?
Yep. Yeah, I would say maybe even potentially a little bit earlier, because the fall of Troy is it's somewhere in between 1250 to like 1187 BC. There's one sort of archaeological destruction layer at Troy in 1250. And then there's another one in 1187 that's Troy 5 and Troy 7 is what they're called archaeologically. And they both line up with like raiding, destructing, pillaging forces.
And that kind of begs the question too. It's like, where do you draw the line of like, this is when the sea peoples are really like, we have the Egyptian inscriptions, and that's really what we're thinking of when we think of sea peoples. But it's kind of like the Viking Age, right? Like before the Viking Age, there was the Vendel period. And there was a lot of raiding going on in the Vendel period, but we don't really call it the Viking Age until the sack of Lindisfarne, the monastery that the Norse came and sacked. And that was unprecedented because monasteries hadn't really been attacked that much before. And then they finally realized it's like, oh, all these rich monks also don't really fight. So taking candy from
it's
a
like
baby.
that scene in the Vikings, right? Where they go in there and they're just slaughtering the monks. Like, what the fuck? They just have all these gold inscriptions.
It's like they're rich and they don't fight. Like win-win. But
I just looked it up, and it looks like 1177 was when the first Ramses III inscription was made in Egypt. So it's like literally could have been 10 years after the Trojan War.
But we can't say there was raiding before, and we see Norse warrior culture and ships and stuff before the start of the Viking Age. They were still active prior. So it's like, what point do you consider the endemic warfare and raiding in the Mediterranean? When does it really become, it's like, these guys have taken it to the next level, and now we can call them the sea peoples? You can't really draw necessarily a clear distinction, but we see the build up. Eventually there's a point where it's like we've got whole groups of people coming from across Europe, all southward towards, and I think that's where you can really start to say is when they attack Egypt and the Hittite kingdoms and Middle Eastern kingdoms. So that's not just raiding and plundering islands, that's full scale burning down cities far from home. So I think that's when you can really say the sea peoples kind of became the sea peoples, but it's not clear cut, you know.
And I'm curious about the seafaring technology, because you hear about, for example, during you hear that?
It's my my in-laws are watching a movie
no
on
worries.
full volume right now. I've got my sorry.
No, you're good. I was
Trying mute when it's loud. Yeah.
No, you're good. What I was going to ask about is regarding the seafaring technology. Hear about, for example, in the first Punic Wars, the Romans had to basically learn how to rebuild a navy largely off of, I think what they had is they had this structure on their boats that would latch on to
the corvus.
The corvus, which to me implies that they didn't have super advanced seafaring technology. So I guess my question is, do you think that a lot of this seafaring technology that was used during the Bronze Age was lost, or is it just that the people who engaged in the raids of the Sea Peoples weren't groups like maybe the Romans or the Latins who didn't have the seafaring technology. Because it seems to me that maybe if people are going all the way, for example, from Iberia to Egypt, that they must have had fairly advanced seafaring technology, whereas I don't know if I see that as much afterwards. Like, was this lost? Is it just kind of like, what's going on with that?
I think kind of from like a military technology perspective, so we see a lot of the ships that we think the Sea Peoples would have used are very similar to ones used in like Bronze Age Scandinavia. And they're advanced enough to cross seas and transport raiders. But by the time of the Romans and Carthaginians, triremes and those kinds of ships were just a lot better for fighting. I think they would have blown the Sea Peoples out of the water with that technology. It's just that the Romans, I think, comparatively sucked, and they had to adopt from the Greeks and the Carthage. I think they'd like base their ship hull designs off of like a crashed Carthaginian ship because
interesting.
They hadn't really needed to fight at sea until then, which kind of props that they were able to adapt that and then beat the Carthaginians at it. But with the Sea Peoples, a little interesting thing is one of the ways the Egyptians defeated them is they lured the Sea Peoples ships into the Nile Delta, where their river boats, they knew the river, they knew their ships were better for the Nile. So they lure all these sea ships into the Nile and ambush them there and destroy them there. And that's how they stopped one of the attacks. So the Sea People's ships were not invincible, and they were only good for certain things. So I don't know if it's necessarily that technology was lost. It's just kind of relative. In that time, it was cutting edge sea technology. But
also, I don't know. I'm not like I'm not the military historian, so to speak, like Dane is, but I don't believe that their ships were necessarily like made for combat at sea. Like, I'm pretty sure they were just made for getting them across the sea safely. I think the missing link that you can probably refer to from like the Sea Peoples to the times of the Romans are like the Phoenicians, because we know that the Phoenicians, who came from roughly the same area, had the technology to make it all the way to Carthage, all the way to the Iberian Peninsula. And there's even evidence of like early Roman coinage that was brought by the Phoenicians all the way in the Azores Islands, thousands of miles off the coast of the Iberian Peninsula. So we know that they were capable of making like extremely long voyages by sea. So that to me is like, yeah, maybe it's like 600, 500 years too early, but they had the technology at some point to be able to make those voyages that stretch.
So it's kind of, I don't know if any of you are not just Game of Thrones fans, but more so like the Song of Ice and Fire series. Like, if you've read any of those.
I'm honestly not super familiar with it.
There's this thing with, you seen the show though?
I've seen one season.
Okay. So you know the Ironborn, like they're kind of supposed to be like the Viking equivalent of Game of Thrones. In the books, it's noted that their ships are primarily to be able to do these long distances, to basically drop off quickly troops to raid villages and leave, but they're notoriously bad in actual sea combat. So I guess it's just that these boats that the Sea Peoples were using were primarily not used for naval combat. They were used just kind of get them all around, right?
They were probably only coming across other merchant ships, so they probably didn't even need to worry about the combat. You know, it's not until you get into like when like Rome and Carthage both have their own ships that it's like, okay, now we need to make sure that we can fight if we come across one another.
I'd have to imagine raiding on the sea, like, encountering a merchant ship, you kind of just catch up to them and park next to them, pull them over. And if they did have to fight, you probably kind of like Viking Age ships, kind of just pull up next to each other and fight that way. But when you get to the Greeks and Romans, you've got ships that are like built for ramming through other ships. And you've even got some, I think they started to mount like ballistas on ships and stuff. So you got real like hardcore naval combat. I guess you could say maybe for like a historical example, like the difference between like an ironclad from like the end of the Civil War and like a World War I battleship. It's just like against other ironclads, it's great, but it's fine. But once you start getting into the big guns, it's just like there's no hope. The gap's too big. So I think that's what's kind of going on there. And yeah, with the Viking ships, I guess George did his research there because Viking ships were very fast and they could go upriver easily, and that's what made them so effective. They could sail upriver really quickly, hit an unprotected town or monastery, and then get out before an army showed up to fight them. So I guess he did his research there. I've heard mixed things about how he approaches world building and history, but
it reminds me of playing you ever play Crusader Kings or any of those games?
No, but
always
people
a
have been
Total
telling me
War
like
guy,
crazy.
but
Yeah.
Crusader
you gotta
Kings
play
I've
it.
heard is one of that, and Age of Empires I've heard a ton about.
I was just mentioning because they have like a rating mechanism where you don't really want to get caught by the local big armies. You want to just quickly raid a village and hop back on your boats, and you make a shit ton of money doing that. So I just imagine something like that happening during the Bronze Age collapse and Sea Peoples. But it's fascinating
100%.
stuff because I've not looked into it as much as you guys have. So it's nice to get that comprehensive review of everything going on. It's very fascinating.
It's very serendipitous too, the fact that like Dane just sort of had I mean, like you mentioned, you've had the Sea People's idea forever, and then I think it was back in February, Dane like floated the idea of Sea People's Summer and doing like a Sea People's video. Because I was living in Los Angeles, I was like 5 minutes from the beach, and we wanted to do an episode on the beach, and Dane was like, we should talk about the Sea Peoples at the beach. That'd be awesome. So the idea of Sea People's Summer originated a long time ago. Finally, in May, we shot the thing before the summer, and then within the span of like 2 weeks, the Odyssey came out. We finally finished our graphic design for the Sea People's Summer merch. And then also one of the bigger history accounts, Fortress of Luki, dropped a video about the collapse of Mycenaean civilization and how it was essentially the Sea Peoples that they would ultimately become, but they already kind of were. And it was like due to the Celtic, like Urnfield. So all happened in like within 2 weeks of each other. And I was like, dude, we need to drop this merch right fucking now. It's like, it is peak Sea People's Summer.
Very, very propitious.
We commissioned an artist from Greece, from Athens, to do it. So spent a lot of time getting that ready, and it's awesome to see new Sea People art because there's just not a lot of it out there. So yeah, all very serendipitous for sure.
And do you think that there is a little bit of a misconception that the because I don't know if this is true or not. I always kind of before honestly you guys illuminating this, I always kind of thought, one of the big themes of the Mycenaeans was getting conquered by the Sea Peoples. Do you think there's a bit of a misconception that that's the case, whereas in reality it's like, we was the Sea Peoples the whole time?
Well, interestingly enough, like I said, you have the Hittite records from before 1200 BC, before the like formal, or maybe right at the time of the formal Bronze Age collapse, talking about the Ahiawa, which are the Achaeans, and they talk about the Denyen, which we are as Homer's Danaans. I think there might have even been another one for like the Argives, but I'm not sure. But we do know that the Hittites were very familiar with the Mycenaean peoples. Like there's like, they didn't call themselves Mycenaeans. Like I said, they called themselves Achaeans and Danaans. And so they transliterated that as Ahiawa and Denyen. And then later on, like in 1100 BC, you have the Dorian invasion, which is these, I'm not going to say they're proto-Celtic, but they were at least more influenced by the Celts. The Dorian invasion of Mycenae, in places like Sparta and Mycenae, and they brought more of that sort of like Celtic culture with armor, swords, material culture, burial styles, and stuff like that into the peninsula. So it's also like, yes, they were Sea Peoples themselves before the collapse, and then even after the collapse, more Sea Peoples came in, replaced them, and became Sea Peoples again from the same location. and they just like spoke and wrote in a different language. That was like when we had like the Mycenaeans had linear B, that was their writing style, and then these Dorians come in, they don't have linear B, they speak in a completely different language, and then I think that that's where you get, I hope that people don't go crazy if I get this wrong, but I think that's where Koine Greek comes from, because it was like a different language from the linear B script.
And a couple of more questions about that. Is it possible, I mean, maybe you're kind of implying this as well, I'm trying to follow like the whole trajectory of everything going on, but do you think that maybe the Dorians coming in, displacing the Mycenaeans is what caused them to start raiding, probably to some degree in the first place?
I think it's all a like a domino effect. Like you have like the Urnfield culture forcing whoever was like in the Balkans at the time south, and then those people in the Balkans force everybody in Greece south, and then everybody in Greece just like continues onwards, and then it's to the point where it's like, okay, all our shit's being taken, we need to go take somebody else's shit.
So it's just like layers of sea peoples.
Yeah, it's probably reciprocal too, right? Like the Mycenaeans are fighting each other more, which is causing economic distress and weakening, which allows other people to come in. And there's also the whole thing about the prominence of mercenary groups, and kind of like you see with the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Romans hire a bunch of Germans to do their fighting, and then all of a sudden the Germans go, oh wait, now we're the ones with the swords, why don't we just take this for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And then they incorporate Romans into their army as they take over local settlements, and then those guys become, so it all just becomes kind of like this cycle of destruction and raiding, and then recruiting and raiding more. And I think that's what eventually drives it south, is like now you've got so many people who are economically destitute and who are raiders from both locals and people who came from abroad. They probably first fought, but then you've got to fill your ranks back up. And they see Egypt and these other kingdoms that are relatively untouched, and it's like, okay, we've been killing each other this whole time, let's go steal some fresh stuff from down south. So I think that's what finally drove them across the sea into the Near East. But yeah, I think it's like Jonas said, just this domino effect that culminated in the big invasions that
you see it before. You see it in, like I said, the armor styles and the weaponry, but you also even see it in the names, like the name Eqwesh, which was one of the most more popular sort of tribal names for the sea peoples, we believe comes from the Indo-European word for horse, which is equus. And so we think that it's just this like weird garbling of them calling them like the horse people, because the horse people would have come into the Balkans, the Greek peninsula, and then like into Egypt, and maybe they just sort of like kept that name. Maybe that's what the Ahyawa and the Denyen were calling them, was the Eqwesh, and so then they just got that name Eqwesh. They were the horse people,
And that's what makes, when we talk about like Sardinia, the Nuragi, we see the Shurden probably come from that area with the horned helmets. That's what kind of links them there. And as far as Spain and Portugal, and it's like, okay, we can see why the Mycenaeans and maybe the people who invaded the Mycenaeans might have gone south. But what got guys all the way from freaking Portugal involved in this charade? And that's why, that's where the question is of like, they had to have still been in contact and in communication and known of what was going on to say, all right, let's go join this shit show over here. Sail all the way.
It's clearly ripe over there
to join that. Yeah. So it all is more interconnected than you would assume. It's just a shame that we don't know the specifics, right? It's not like we can say a letter was sent like, hey, you want to come join raiding with us? We just don't know that level of specifics. But it leaves the question of how people from so far got word of this going on.
It also too is because like the people in the Greek peninsula were doing the same thing as people in the Italian peninsula. You can imagine something similar was going on in the Iberian peninsula, just Urnfield culture moving south. It's a simple explanation, but it's it's plausible.
Which goes to show the Urnfielders were really cross Europe. That goes to show how powerful and influential they were. Which probably more than we give them credit for. We don't tend to think of the Celts as having like an empire. We kind of just think of them as scattered across Europe in the forest doing whatever until the Romans show up. But it's like these guys are pretty active and pretty organized.
You have Celts all the way in Turkey. What were they called? They're mentioned in the Bible.
Galatians.
The Galatians. You have the Galatians all the way in Turkey, who are a Celtic people with a Celtic culture, speaking a Celtic language. At the same time that you have the Galicians in Portugal, and then the Britons all the way up in the British Isles. Like, they were all over Europe. It's kind of one of those things where, like, if you like don't have a sort of, if you're not sure what the distinct culture is at the time, if it's not specifically like Greek or Latin or like later Germanic, it was Celtic. It was like the entire landmass of Europe was Celtic.
And, you know, kind of on the opposite side of it, I've heard some theories, and these are just theories. I've not looked into it that much, but I've heard some theories that the Welsh or like the Dark Britain phenotype might actually have some connection to the Phoenicians, that maybe some of them went all the way up as far as Britain. I wonder if you guys have caught wind of that at all, or maybe if you have any thoughts about if that could be true.
It is interesting. I haven't really heard it, but I mean, like I said, if the Phoenicians are able to make it all the way to the Azores Islands, it's even easier for Britain to make it to the Iberian Peninsula, which we know that there were Phoenicians there, so it's totally plausible.
Yeah, there's no way that it's not possible, right? And we see these weird little things even as late as like colonial history, where it's like just random groups of people where you wouldn't expect them just end up traveling and settling somewhere. So I absolutely could see somehow a group of Phoenicians got up into Wales and created those dark Bretons like Ren.
I just did a quick Google search, and I was looking up what the haplogroups, because this is kind of like the easiest way to track like male-driven, war-driven migrations into places. So it looks like 74 to 80% of Welsh male lineages are R1b, which is exactly what you would expect from a Celtic population. There's 12% of a Norse Germanic marker with the I haplogroup. And then there is also present in smaller localized traces rare pockets of historically noted in specific Welsh towns E, G, and J specifically comes from the Levant.
So it's possible. Very possible.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
It's around haplogroup J is found at roughly 15% in Wales specifically, which is one of the highest concentrations in all of Europe.
Wow. So that this is becoming like we just stumbled
dude, yeah, I never would have thought to check Wales haplogroups. That's insane.
I do have to wonder if some of that too comes from the Anglo-Saxon invasions, because what Wales basically was the Romano-Bretons who resisted the onslaught of the Germanics. So in the Roman world, of course, probably brought some Levantine just because it was all.
Sorry, is that the King Arthur legend too? Like he was Romano-British, right?
Yeah, he was like a Romano-Briton warlord who kind of rallied the locals against the Germanics. And he himself, there's theories that he was descended from or was a Sarmatian, and that's why his dragon banner, which the Sarmatians used, it was kind of like his rallying thing, or he was a descendant of a Roman Sarmatian officer. And we know Roman auxiliary Sarmatians were in Britain stationed there. So it kind of it's so fascinating. You can go down these rabbit holes of these connections. But yeah, it's absolutely possible that some Levantines that ended up in Britain just, they all lived in the Roman Empire, and then those Germanics came and they all kind of consolidated in Welsh. But I see it as an absolute possibility that some of that Levantine population was from the Phoenicians. And if I'm right, the Carthaginians were basically Phoenicians. Is that correct?
I think so.
Or Phoenician offshoot?
My understanding is they were totally Phoenician, is my understanding.
Like Phoenician colonies who kind of
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Kane.
I have to make a quick correction. I was a little bit ahead of myself as I was reading. You can't just trust Gemini. You got to look a little bit deeper. And it looks like the haplogroup that is J, that shows up at a frequency of 15% in whales, is from the mtDNA, which is from the mother side. So it's most likely that that's probably from a Neolithic, like very, very early, like Neolithic hunter-gatherers, early European farmers that had the J haplogroup from the Anatolian Neolithic farmers who came into the British Isles. So sorry to spoil the fun.
Jonas
there,
just
but
blew up our theory. Come on, man.
I know, fuck. But hey, it's still possible, okay? Like, we don't know.
Yeah.
This could all be bullshit.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. We're all basing our presuppositions on fake history. The true history is hidden under the text and the esoteric readings of the ancient legends. I had a bit of a slightly divergent speculative question, not to get super on the social dynamics, but I'm wondering, an interesting phenomena. Obviously, there's a big difference on the sort of place of women in Mediterranean cultures versus the Celtic and Germanic cultures. For example, even with the Romans, there's this funny sort of interpretation of prostitution I'm bringing up a lot from Cicero and Plautus. And obviously Cicero is a fairly conservative Roman thinker, I would say. And he basically has this quote where it's something where along the lines of, as long as you're not having sex with Roman mothers, married Roman women, young boys, and widows, then who am I to tell you can't sleep with prostitutes? And, you know, basically the interpretation being is that the Romans had a very strong prohibition on the two different kind of what we today would call the Madonna and whore complex. Like there's the matrona, which is the Roman mother who has to be pure, who has to secure the male bloodline. So obviously she can't cheat. But then you also have the meretrix, which roughly translates in Latin to woman who accepts money for sex, so prostitute. And then there is the infamia, which means you were adulterous or something, and now you're defamed for life, your reputation is scorned. But you see this as well, the Greeks, where obviously the women aren't engaged in the polis. They're kind of just at home with the kids. So, but the Spartans is unique, and of course, they're, from my understanding, they're Dorian, right?
They're Dorian, yeah.
Dorian, right? So they're essentially Proto-Celtic. So I'm wondering maybe if that kind of plays into their attitude on women, because obviously they're a lot more. I don't want to say necessarily egalitarian.
Right. That's where your mind goes, though. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you guys have
because,
that.
I mean, it totally makes sense. Because if you think about like the Laconian or Lacedaemonian, I'm not sure which one is the correct one, culture, there is a much greater emphasis on the sort of power that's given to women. And what's funny is that like both the men and women of that society would tell you that it's because of the strength of their men. And I think that that's so fascinating, is like when you have strong men, you can also have strong women in a culture, which is also kind of like what you see with the idea of like shield maidens in like Viking culture. If you have strong men, you can tolerate strong women. But you can't tolerate strong women if your men are pussies, because then like shit's just going to fall apart. Unless you're like the Amazons or something. But yeah, it totally makes sense. And also because if you do have a culture that is focused on like the warrior aristocracy and the fact that the men are going to fight, often you need women to be able to fill the roles of the men while they're gone, especially after a time like the Bronze Age, where like maybe you only had like the warrior elite fighting. But now it's like if your entire culture is comprised of warrior elites, you're all going to fight. And somebody has got to be able to take care of the women and children, and it's going to be the women themselves.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Dane?
You kind of see in HBO's Rome, the attitude of prostitution comes up a lot. And the soldiers, especially like Titus Fulla, they've been fighting in Gaul for like 10, 15 years. And he's like, you know, he's fucking all the Gallic women, sometimes by force. Because yeah, guys at war get horny. let's be
really
real. We see that behavior in sacking of cities all the time. So it's kind of makes sense to rationalize, like, yeah, if you're a warrior or a soldier, and you got your needs and you're out there, there's prostitutes and there's prisoners of war to use, right? But at the home front, when the soldiers come back, Vorenus has a family, and his wife has been holding down the fort, raising his kids while he's off at war. But she had a tryst with another man, and her final child
Tragic.
isn't his, and that, it ends up in her death, right?
Wasn't it kind of like an Odysseus sort of situation? Didn't she think that he was like dead or not?
Yeah. She thought, or
such a cop out. You're not allowed to think I'm dead.
That he wasn't coming back from Gaul and all this stuff. But also, I mean, she did like the guy and like had feelings for him. Mm-hmm. In his absence, and he comes back,
which is
and
even
he
worse.
Thinks it's
There's
his
no Penelope, that's for sure.
No.
He thinks it's his daughter's child, but eventually the truth comes out, and
he spirals.
She commits suicide because of it. Well, he's about to kill her, and then she kills herself.
And that's why Julius Caesar dies too. In
Rome. They kind of.
It's such a good series.
The political
I gotta watch that
intrigue
again.
with the lower classes. Kind of funny how they connect that. But
if Augustus never slept with his sister, then we wouldn't have had Caesar die. It's all his fault. From the show logic, of course.
That really is how it transmits. Actually, kind of funny. But yeah, it just shows a completely different attitude towards sex. And then I think it's Tacitus who relates with Germanic women. I think there was a Germanic slave woman who like murders her captor and comes back to her husband and says, the only man I slept with other than you, I killed. So it's like they had a much more egalitarian, if you want to say that.
And monogamous, really, as well.
Monogamous.
In Germania, I think what Tacitus writes is that a lot of the times these German women wouldn't actually get married until they were like 24 or 25. Meanwhile, you have a Greek or a Roman woman, she's like 13 and like,
13, 14.
Yeah, but they really prize a strong connection and a monogamous one. I think you see this even in German culture later on with the works of Wagner, Tristan and Isolde. The character of Parsifal, where purity is really this hallmark of the Germanic character all the way back to antiquity, really. So I think it's interesting as well that you said when you have strong men, you got strong
Sopranos, the Italians, the Kumars or
Gumars.
Yeah. It's like, I guess that's still kind of part of Mediterranean culture to this day.
I mean, look at
there's that divergent attitude still coming into the present. I don't know how much I don't know that much about mafia life or what have you, but
I was gonna picture. It's not about like whether or not they intended it. It's like one of those truths that's going to reveal itself through the culture no matter what.
And
Henry Hill was the informant in Goodfellas. I mean, he was basically, he couldn't be a fully made member because he was half Irish, but he was tapped into all that. And he would talk about when they were at the Copacabana, it's like what Fridays are for Gumas, Saturdays are for wives, or something like that. That's almost
like know about it, and they're like kind of expected to be okay with it, but they cannot cheat. Because if they do, then that's a whole, stain on the man's honor, and he's got to kill the other guy, and it's Yes. It's fascinating how history changes, but does it really?
I guess the moral of the story is that the true European way is kind of egalitarian, but it's not feminist in the sense that modern feminism exists.
It's very much like I'm going through Evelo's revolt against the modern world so slowly, just because like every time I read something, I want to read it 3 times to like really make sure I'm understanding what he's saying, because he does get kind of like airy-fairy with some things, I feel like. But it's because he's talking about such broad ideas. And I think that he's kind of right in this idea about like the spirit of the civilization having like a real importance. And like if you lose that spirit, then like you depend on the interconnectivity of the families and of the actual like nation itself. And if you don't have that either, like you're just completely destroyed. You don't have anything. And I do think that ultimately, like when we trace what European culture has become from like the Proto-Indo-Europeans and they're merging with like the Neolithic farmers and that kind of thing. You see this like really interesting blend of all of those ideals. And I think the strongest thing that you can point to is this idea that, like, yes, if you have a strong warrior aristocracy of people that pride themselves on strength, you also tend to see the ideal of the strength and the bond of the family, this like sanctity of the family. And when you have the sanctity of the family and like the sacredness of the warrior elite at the same time, you have a pretty stable society. Once you start to branch out and you start to incorporate more elements into that society, that's when you start to see like maybe the small denigration of that family thing here, where you get a guy like Cicero saying like, who am I to tell you to not sleep with prostitutes?
Well, you even see with Augustus, he passes all these laws to try to get Romans to have families and kids, and
Yes.
Especially the elites, is it the equites or equus, whatever their equivalent of knights were, their elite class. It's like they stopped they stopped having families and a lot of kids, and Augustus is sitting there trying to basically get the birth rates up. He's like, have freaking kids. He's trying to do it through laws, but laws can only incentivize so much without the cultural kind of emphasis. That's kind of where you can obviously connect that to us today and our situation with having families, the birth rate, what have you.
Didn't Rome previously have a law where men who were enlisted in the military were not allowed to get married until a certain point or something like that?
I think that's
the Roman army did have something like that. I don't know when it was introduced and when
I think it was before. I think it was during the Republic, maybe.
Was it before Marius's reforms, or was that part of Marius?
I think it.
I look that up.
Yeah. I'd be curious, because that's when really Rome goes from like citizen soldiers in almost like a militia sense, like it's your duty to the state, to make soldiery a professional. Like you go sign up with a recruiter and serve X amount of years. So I am curious.
Here's something interesting. Actually, it was actually Augustus apparently who began that restriction in 13 BC, and it wasn't lifted until 197 AD by Emperor Septimus Severus. So this was actually Augustus who put that in line, which is kind of interesting.
I wonder if it's maybe so that the men who are off don't leave wives without kids, or like without raising their kid.
So that you don't get another Gaius situation.
Yeah. So that the Roman women at home can marry someone who's going to be there and raise the kids and have many kids, and then so maybe the soldiers abroad will
make families.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, soldiers settled all over the empire, soldier colonies and things. So, yeah, interesting. That came at the same time he's trying to get the birth rates up. Well, I think I think he was really trying to focus on the nobility to get them to do it.
Yeah,
because the nobility had gotten kind of, you could say, decadent and enjoying the pleasures of luxury, which, as we kind of see, incentivizes you less to focus on building a family.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, all these different attitudes and how they relate. I think that's one thing that I mean, I love Bap obviously, but one thing I think he gets wrong is he kind of just says the family structure is fake and gay, and I think that's wrong. I think there is such a thing as romance, and I think that he's maybe more Mediterranean minded, where it's like, oh, I have my wife, and then I have the guba on the side. It's okay.
100%. I'm reading this book, On the Tracks of Life, by Gioacchino Leo Serra, who is an Italian author, and he talks a lot about the differences between what he calls the Southern mindset and like the Northern mentality or mindset. And with Southern and Northern, he's mostly talking about Southern Mediterranean, Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal, and then Northern being like the Germanic Celtic territories, Northern Celtic territories. And he talks about how, they are more focused on the family, but because they're more focused on the sanctity of the family, you do see this rise of like romantic love, as opposed to what he calls like vitalistic love, or like primal love. and he being an Italian, he's kind of like more what would you say? He's more in alignment with this idea of like, yeah, love is supposed to be like this purely physical thing, like the whole airy fairy sort of romance thing that like the English and the northern peoples have created. It's not conducive to a vitalistic man, but it's like, I don't know, don't get conquered then, you know? Like I think that sanctity of the family is going to bring about this idea. I mean, like you see like the chivalric thing with the knights, it's like they're all oriented towards, you see these stories of like these knights doing everything for like a princess or for their love, and like ultimately they're oriented towards this like higher ideal of love, whereas like in the Mediterranean maybe you don't really have that so much. It's more about personal glory.
Yeah.
It's,
oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say really quickly that you could see this in the Spanish Empire versus the English Empire. Like the Spanish, I mean, Hernan Cortez had, I don't know how many children, but the conquistadors, these men, they were encouraged to have relations with locals. And this is where you have their whole racial caste system where, you know, mestizo, castizo, all this different ranking. But then you have the English, and I would argue that the English had a much more stable imperial structure because these people were coming in and bringing their families and building their roots, retaining their culture, and they had a strong connection. So, I mean, I think that's a good example of that. But Dane, what were you going to say?
Kind of when you mentioned Bap, and I don't think he's ever said this specifically, but people kind of associate, right, with this idea that like strong vitalistic man, a warlord will go take a whole bunch of concubines and wives and have like 1 billion kids to carry on his genetic legacy. And that's like the sort of like warlord based thing to do. But it gets kind of complicated when you see like Germanic cultures who are obviously very warrior minded actually tend towards strong family structure. And when you do look at, like you just brought up, the difference between like Spain and Portugal's approach versus like England's approach to colonization, you do see they were much more about getting involved with the locals, getting it on, having a bunch of kids. And we see, I've read the history of the Incas, and the conquistadors would love to take a lot of wives and all these things. They constantly, and they're Catholic, right? But they don't care. They divorce in the New World, all this stuff. And the English never to that degree mixed with the Northern Native Americans. There's obviously some, right? But they tended to stick with their own families. And there's also this idea that Christianity introduced monogamy to the pagan world, but we see pretty clearly that's not the case. You have to wonder if that sanctity of marriage was an idea that appealed to the Germanics and helped in that conversion, where it's like, oh, they also value celibacy, except with the woman, the mother of your children, that kind of thing. So it's like there is the kind of meme that it's the base thing to go have a bunch of kids all over the world and like have all these women. But we see in like the Ottomans and the Chinese empires, they do this whole harem thing too. And it often ends in disaster when you have a bunch of kids who all come from the sultan or the emperor, and then he dies and they all have
a claim to the throne.
Yeah, exactly. And
it's
the Ottoman sons, they always like have to kill all of their brothers whenever there's a succession. And it's like, that's probably not the best way to run a civilization either.
I'm making this video series right now on like the Reconquista of Spain and Portugal. And one of the things that I keep coming across it's finished, like I filmed it, but as I was writing it, I kept coming across these almost like these points where you're like, okay, well, surely they're about to complete the Reconquista and everything's going to be fine. But then you have a king who's got 3 wives and 10 children, and they all have a claim to the throne. And then the kingdom gets split into 3 again because he wants to give all of his children a claim to the throne. And it's because like they come from this Visigothic aristocracy where they originally had a Germanic line of descent to the throne, where it was like very focused on the family, and the family was sacred, but they would also elect the best leader. So there would be like election of the best. All of the nobles would choose the next king. It had nothing to do with paternal descent. And then as they became more Roman, they started following the Roman line of what's the word I'm looking for? I claim to the throne, and they would just like they would give their children the throne as opposed to electing the next best leader. And then this, obviously, as you see them become more and more Mediterraneanized, you could say, you start to see them having many wives and then tons of illegitimate children, and they're constantly fighting over who actually has the rightful claim to the throne, which is not something that you would expect of like a Germanic peoples. But when you've been in the Mediterranean for several hundred years, like that's just like kind of par for the course.
Yeah, when in Rome.
Yeah.
Interesting about South America, we talked about the conquistadors, but the Incas, prior to any Spaniards showing up, their elite caste, their nobility was all, for one, it was all incestuous. You could only marry your cousins, your sisters. I mean, that's how it was passed. You had the next Inca had to have been pure blood from a royal son and a royal sister. It was they all came from brother and sister marriages. But the Inca himself had tons of concubines, he slept with basically everybody. But they had a very specific culture of only the son of the brother and sister of their father. Like they had a system to keep in place that he was the one that was going to become the primary, and everyone else was going to serve and support him, and he would provide for them. They had a way to work around the whole succession crisis of having that many kids, but it broke right before the Spanish got there because the father Inca loved his second son so much that he wanted to split the kingdom between his two kids. And his elder son agreed to it, and then the latter son caused a civil war when the father died. And that's when the Spanish show up. They're in the middle of a pretty bloody civil war. And so it's just kind of funny how different societies take this approach to who gets to inherit, how do you balance that? And then the Spanish get there and they're like, oh, we also love to They adopted the South American mindset. You kind of adopt the mindset of wherever you go, unless you're like the English, where you're, they kept their kind of Germanic, if you will, approach to marriage.
It's interesting.
Just to add to that, I think I would make a bit of a different argument, one based more upon a kind of a rational view of romance than utility, because obviously there's a utilitarian argument for both sides as to why you have it this way versus that way, and then there's probably material conditions that led to the existence of harems versus your more tribal peoples who probably just had a scarcity of women. I mean, these men were constantly dying in battle, and there's like a different view of, I suppose, like I'll build on that in a second. But what I wanted to say was, I guess my critique of the kind of more Mediterranean position, or like the BAT position, would be that in viewing, not to sound like a feminist or anything, but I think there is something kind of lame about viewing women in this very materialistic way. And again, not trying to sound lame. I'm not a modern day feminist, but
it's okay to say that, bro. It's okay to say that. I agree with you.
Dude, the amount of times I have a few trad friends in real life, and it's so funny. He looked at me once like, you don't have to apologize for not being a psycho, because like online everybody shows they're
gonna call you like a white knight and shit like that, but it's like, sorry, I just like respect the sanctity of the family, and I don't view like women as a material object.
Right. But what I would say there is, for me, it's not utilitarian, but it's kind of an irrational thing, where I think romance is a beautiful thing and it adds to the flavor of life, and it's just kind of boring to view women in this objective way.
Yeah, there's a depth of relationship. Yeah, Jonas, please. You're obviously a monogamous man. Yeah, and a romantic.
No, beyond I've been with my girl for a long time, but beyond that, like I said, in studying Spanish history so deeply, you find that there was all these constant succession crises with the different kings and their various wives and stuff like that. And the two people who brought an end to the Reconquista, reclaimed all of Spain and Portugal, finally made it happen, were Ferdinand and Isabella. And Ferdinand and Isabella, Isabella was a descendant of the Castilian king who, when he died, she sort of like claimed the throne as a princess, and she was given the authority by her father to marry a man of her choosing, which was not super common. Women would usually just be like married off into whatever was, she got an offer to marry King Alfonso of Portugal. She got an offer to marry this guy, this king, and she ended up marrying this prince, Ferdinand, who she genuinely loved. At least that's what we're told in all of the sort of chronicles. And they, because of the strength of their relationship, because they had a deep respect for each other, Ferdinand put a lot of sort of laws in place as the man of the relationship, but also as the king, who was seen as higher than the queen at the time, to give her essentially equal footing with him as a ruler. And because of that, the peoples of Castile revered the peoples of Navarre and Aragon in the same way. And there was this like total unity of the Christian kingdoms that were able to ultimately conquer the Muslims. And it wouldn't have been possible if they didn't have this deep reverence for each other that led for the deep reverence of their separate kingdoms. And it's kind of like one of those crazy romance stories, but like their romance literally united the kingdoms and allowed them to create Spain. Like Spain was built off the back of their romance. And I think that there's a big lesson to be learned there.
Yeah. It's like, you can say, like, in modern times, like, especially because now we have contraception and all these things and pretty libertine sexual attitudes, it's like, yeah, you can pretty easily, sleep around and like hook up, and it's like, it can be kind of fun, right? And it's like, oh yeah, like you see all these masculinity gurus and they're like, oh, I bang a new chick every week, all this kind of stuff. And it's like appealing in a sense, but then like you kind of find out it's pretty hollow, and like it's kind of like eating junk food, where it's like it feels really good in the moment, but then you're like left feeling like kind of sick.
It's also kind of spiritually gay.
Yeah. And you're trading, you're going in the same place that a bunch of other dudes, you're passing it around. It's like, and there's something to be said that's special when you actually are romantically infatuated with a woman beyond just banging her. It's like there's a real like sense of eros and affection, and like and this might sound a little gay, but like, when you're just hanging out, watching TV together, or going to.
Whoa, now you've lost. No.
But is it good to love your girlfriend?
there is something special when you have a real relationship with someone, with a woman that's romantic, and there's a sacredness when it's monogamous, where you're not sharing it with anyone else, you're sharing only each other, and that's special. It's like when it's not.
We talked about this in our last podcast together.
Yeah, this kind of idea of like when it's sacred and hidden from everyone else, that gives it this extra value. It's and then you look at the lives of some of these guys who like, are obsessed with banging a bunch of chicks, and they get to 40, they don't have a family. They're still like banging 23-year-olds, going out to bars. And it's like, what are you doing, dude? Like if you were like 18, 19, 20, this might've been okay. But like, it's kind of sad in a way. Like you kind of end up past a certain age. That's loser behavior. So I think there's something that a lot of people who think that way miss out on. Come on, who's never had like a crush on somebody? And it's just like when you're together,
it's the best feeling in the world.
Yeah. There's totally an element of that a lot of people miss out on.
And if I could add to that, the more irrational kind of romantic argument for this, because obviously, again, there's a utilitarian argument to monogamy. Obviously, societies where there's less incel men with no sex. Actually, here's an interesting thing. I have made the argument recently. This is a kind of meme I've been saying that Marxism ultimately has to lead to rape, and the reason why is because you can get rid of the material inequality, you can get rid of scarcity, material scarcity, but you're never going to get rid of the irrational scarcity of romance. Women aren't just going to magically go 1-to-1 and be attracted to a guy. So you're going to have all these Stacys, and you're going to have all these incel chuds without a romantic partner. And the only way for Marxism to work is to sublimate the sexual aggressive energy of the incel chuds by saying, Stacey, you got to marry the incel chud.
It's just completely, it's completely unnatural, and nothing that doesn't accord to the laws of nature is going to fail ultimately.
That's why it's hard on a societal level, right? It's like, yeah, if you could make every guy and every girl, put them together, match them up based on whatever.
Looks matched. Force
them to be together and raise a family. It's like everyone's needs would theoretically be met, but we're irrational creatures. Yeah, and Christianity, in its relation, it does really incentivize that to its credit. But humans are irrational creatures. We have feelings. We have our preferences, right? So you can't legislate that to perfection. You just cannot. You have to let Eros and romance function in its own way. The state mandated GF thing is always so. It always does crack me up.
That's why I say Marxism still is based upon a secular interpretation of Christianity. Because if you think about kind of what
it's a perverted Christianity.
Exactly. And because I think if you wanted to create some form of, when I say sexual equality, I don't mean in the gender sense. I mean in the sense that everyone has an equal share of sexual pleasure, I guess, is the kind of reductive way of viewing it. Christianity would be the best way of doing it, because if you say you can only have one partner and you're encouraged to get married or become a nun or a priest or something like that, then naturally you're going to have about a 1-to-1 ratio. Not perfectly, but it's going to get close. But my irrational argument for romance and for love, I guess, sorry, Bap. I'm sorry. I love you, Bap, but forgive me, is even in the cases of cultures with harems, the existence of romance. So, for example, Genghis Khan, obviously, he's notorious for having 2,000 children, all these different wives, right? But I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know this. He was very in love with his first wife. He never loved anyone like he loved Bertha. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but and so much so that she was actually captured for a year by the Merkits, and was actually likely his first child is actually the child of her captor. So she was basically forced into a marriage. I mean, you imagine trying to explain this to somebody like Andrew Tate, like, what bitch got captured and I'm not coming back for her. But like, he went out of his way. He started a war to claim her back because he loved her so much. And of course, look, he has 2,000 kids. I'm sure he enjoyed it too. I'm sure he enjoyed his young, Russian princesses. But at the end of the day, what was the fulfilling relationship in his life? It was his first wife, and his most important wife, and the one who actually had a lot of influence over the Mongolian court. So even in the anti-utilitarian frame, where there is some form of non-monogamy, we recognize that we want romance. There's a prioritization of romance that I think shoots through.
And I think even if you are going to take, like, what is the ultimate Mediterranean perspective, if not like the Homeric sort of idea of, glory via the Iliad and the Odyssey that we're taught. And both Achilles and Odysseus, the main characters, are ultimately oriented towards their love for the women in their lives. Achilles with Briseis, refusing to fight, literally like orienting his entire strategy in Troy around this woman. And then also Odysseus, of course, does he sleep around? Yeah, he does, with Circe and Calypso, maybe even some others in the Secones, but he's ultimately just trying to get home to his wife. And even after spending a year-long affair with Circe, spending a 7-year-long affair with Calypso, a goddess, ultimately he wants to get home to his wife. And so I think that even in the sort of Mediterranean aspect of like, yeah, it's like super Chad to like have a bunch of affairs and stuff. It's like ultimately they know that they want their one, they want their girl, and that's all that matters to them in the pursuit of glory.
An even more contemporary example, Gabriele D'Annunzio. Unfortunately, I have to bring up the same book over and over again by him because there's very few of his books that have been translated to English. So the only book I've really read by him is, I always pronounce this wrong, it's like Il Piacere, the pleasure, or something like that. Okay. But the whole book, there's like 10 pages of a book dedicated to just this guy simping over this girl that he likes. You know, they're both nobles, right? She's like basically a female noble, and he's talking about her hands and, oh my God, she spurned me. Oh, how I felt when she talked to another man, right? And it's very long into the book before there's any romance. It's just him kind of, you know, slowly pursuing her and being super insecure. And of course, Gabrielle D'Annunzio is probably a big womanizer, despite being 5'5" and Norwooding at the age of like 20. So there's hope for you guys. There's hope for anybody out there. If he could do it, you can do it.
Yes.
But yeah, I agree with you, and I think that's clearly there. But yeah, the point I was trying to get at is even when you have these guys, and of course they're enjoying it. Of course, Odysseus enjoyed sleeping with Calypso. I think in Hesiod's Working Days or something like that, or maybe it's the Theogony, I think he actually lists that they had children from their affair.
Interesting.
Yeah. So clearly he enjoyed it. But at the end of the day, love wins. Love always wins. Love conquers all. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And I wonder, this is just a quick theory I'll have, if this sort of kind of romantic monogamy emerged because there wasn't a slave as prevalent of a slave caste in these tribal nomadic peoples, because most of them would have been most of them had 10 horses, most of them had like their own property, versus you go to some of the Semitic cultures, they were with a significant slave caste, they were agricultural people, so naturally it was common for some guy to steal, you know, 10 women that would have been for the slave caste and taken them for himself, whereas in the nomadic peoples, you couldn't, like, there was more equality amongst the elites, where you couldn't just kind of hoard the women. I don't know if you guys kind of have a similar thought.
There's also kind of the idea, like with the Germanics and the steppes, like kind of like the manor bun, right? Like your war band, if you're stealing each other's women, you're not going to be a war band for very long. You're going to be at each other's throats. You cannot afford to be doing that unless your society has a very, very liberty. There's a tribe of Inuit. I think it's Inuit or some Native American tribe really far north, where it's so sparse that polygamy is almost like a necessity for their survival. But like with the Germanics and the steppe guys, and this is kind of what I think Genghis did when he ended bridal kidnapping. It's like they would fight each other because they were taking each other's wives, and that stopped them from functioning on a large scale. But with the Germanics, you know, if you're sleeping with your spear brother's wife, pretty soon he's going to spear you. But in a Roman city where it's like there's tons of people and you have tons of slaves being brought in, and there's a surplus, and you have less of like a bond with the other people in the city, the other guys in the city, you have a little bit more room and incentive to be kind of a douchebag, if you will, and swipe someone's girl or go to the prostitute house or what have you. So I think there's definitely an argument to be made there about the surplus and the social bonds and social structure that allow for these sort of things.
Yeah, it's like like you said with the Corios or the Mannerbund, like if you pissed one guy off, you just pissed off 1/10 of your army, you know. Yeah. Whereas like if you're in Rome and you're part of a,
you see it with the Iliad. Because what Agamemnon takes.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was saying. Agamemnon takes Briseis from Achilles, and that's like, you know, one elite taking the girl of another elite, and it literally causes a 10-chapter absence of Achilles, where there's just like mass slaughtering occurring amongst the Greek ranks and the Trojan ranks too. Like the war didn't stop, but they weren't able to win because they didn't have Achilles, you know?
And even the beginning of the war, like what starts it? I mean, he in the Judgment of Paris at the wedding. Actually, it's kind of funny because this is the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, Achilles' parents. He gets 3 very good fucking gifts, and the worst gift probably seems like the one he went with. So of course, I like to tell this story because it's important. I'm going to write a lot of stuff based upon this myth because I think it's very important regarding the priority of Eros even over power. But Eris, the goddess of discord, is notoriously not invited to the wedding, and she, because they think she's going to cause a ruckus, which she ends up doing because she crashes the wedding, and she has an apple from the Garden of the Hesperides, and she tosses it into the wedding banquet, and inscribed on it is "to the most beautiful." And of course, Athena, Aphrodite, and Hera are all like, yeah, that's for me, right? That's my apple. And Zeus is like, fuck, they're gonna ask me who's the fairest among them all, and if I say one of them, the other two are gonna fucking hate me. Oh, Paris, hey, come here, buddy.
We've all been in that situation before.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. And so, what do? You put the burden on somebody else, a mortal. He'll be fine, right? And so Hera goes up to him and she says, if you give the apple to me, I'm going to give you control over all of Asia, which of course would have been more like Asia Minor. I'll give you dominion upon all these lands. You'll become the most powerful king alive. So he says, okay, that's pretty good. And then Athena goes up to him and she says, you don't need that. Why don't you take that? I can help you take that. I'm going to make you the greatest military mind of your time. I'm going to give you the skills of the strongest warrior in battle. You can take your kingdom for yourself. Okay, that's pretty good. And then, of course, Aphrodite comes. And Aphrodite has the most dangerous gift. And, of course, our appetites are towards these things that destroy us, these delicious, horrible things. And she says, I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman alive. And, of course, that was Helen of Sparta, who becomes Helen of Troy, already married to Menelaus. So instead of taking what from a utilitarian framework would be two much better gifts, oh, I'll be king of Asia, or oh, I'll have the ability to become the king of Asia. No, I'm just going to get the most beautiful woman alive and basically cause the ruin of my city and of my people and of my kingdom.
Curious, it's an apple. I mean,
well, actually, in the Bible, it was a fig originally. The reason that they made it, in Hebrew, I mean, this is what you guys all, heroic ideal. This is what he told me. So I hope he knows what he's talking about. He usually does. He's great. But he said it was a fig originally, and the reason that they made it an apple in the translations was because an apple holds a very special position in a lot of these European mythos. So it made more sense because it represents temptation and all these things.
I'll say it again. Christianity is a European religion.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of
contention there, but every time something comes up, I'm just like, wow, very European. Oh, interesting. That's very European as well.
Yeah, or I mean, like, winter solstice. But anyway, the point being is that he rejected these gifts that would have been better for him, and he selected Eros, he selected love, he selected romance to his own demise. And in fact, if you think about what moves history, it's these little mistakes, which aren't really mistakes, because without the judgment of Paris, without the choice of Paris, of Aphrodite, of Helen, there would be no great legend of Achilles, because you wouldn't have this great war to popularize him. You wouldn't have the Odyssey, because you wouldn't have had this trek back. You wouldn't have had Rome, because, of course, notoriously, Aeneas, who's the son of Aphrodite and a Trojan noble who was also a herdsman, it was revenge for Aphrodite causing gods to fall in love with mortals, is that Zeus made her fall in love with this herdsman. But Aeneas obviously escapes the destruction of Troy, makes his way. He has his own kind of Odyssey. He makes the Aeneid. He makes his way throughout. He stops buying Carthage, breaks Queen Dito's heart. She kills herself, and this is why Carthage and Rome are mortal enemies. And then his line, I think it's 12 generations down, is when Romulus and Remus, from the line of Aeneas, obviously founds Rome. So, I mean, you think about what moves history, it's the erotic. It's this life force of what may seem like self-destruction. I think this is a big issue a lot with leftist academics today, is they view fantasy as something negative, because they think, oh, look at all the destruction that comes from will to power, that comes from this desire for all these things, all these different pleasures. It causes destruction and war and mayhem. But I think the perspective of somebody like Nietzsche is like, well, no, it's tragedy that actually is the motor of our becoming, and that cultivates our evolution. It's these things that may seem like mistakes, but out of them, it actually expands our parameters of experience. And we end up in places of history that wouldn't have happened if there wasn't this mistake in the first place. So I hope that makes sense. I know I ranted a little bit, but I don't even know.
It's great. It reminds me of the Catholic Church has this idea of the Felix Peccatum, which is like the fortunate sin of Adam. It's like, was it fortunate or unfortunate that Adam sinned in the garden? It's like, well, we wouldn't be here if he didn't, would we? We wouldn't have the ability for Christ to make an appearance and to rectify the union between God and man and ultimately do something even greater, right? Like aside from being able to walk with God in the garden, how much cooler is it that we get to sort of like renew those vows, you could say, of our own accord, as opposed to just like, because if God's walking alongside you, like maybe the relationship is two-sided, but maybe there's a little bit less choice involved. And since like he did sin and he sort of gave us this choice, now we have the ability to freely choose God, which is like in their eyes an even greater love.
And from a kind of leftist perspective, I guess it's like, okay, if you don't want those tragic mistakes, then it's state-mandated GF, as you said. You cannot have your cake and eat it too, where humans are completely free, independent thinkers who can make our own choices based on what we want, while also having it all work out perfectly so nobody's left out and nobody's hurt and nobody's upset. It's incompatible, right?
Yep.
So if you're going to reject the idea of Eros and of free choice in a romantic sense, then you have to systemize it into like a utilitarian, here's your partner, like it or not, you guys are together and you can't talk to anybody else. It's kind of like a moot point in my opinion, where it's like we're irrational, sometimes maybe self-destructive, and we just have to sublimate it as best as we can to drive history forward. And I think you're absolutely right that it adds what life is, the experience of life. You know, they talk about how evil the Indo-Europeans were, the Yamnaya and things, because they destroyed these matriarchal societies and introduced hierarchy and all these things. And it's like, okay, we could still be in mud cities singing Kumbaya without any. That's when the Yamnaya invasions happen. That's when you start to see technology and civilization really take off.
Yeah. Shout out the invention of the wheel.
Yeah. And it's like you can demonize all of these wars and things in history, conquests and brutality, but it's like the world we live in, we would not have if that never happened, right? So you have to kind of take the good with the bad, if you will.
And is there even a good and the bad as well, right? Is the thing. And I think you guys should look into this as well, because obviously, you guys are voices in the vitalism sphere, whether you like it or not. You guys are your voice in the vitalism, and I think something would be interesting for you guys to look into that I've been kind of getting exposed to recently is I had a conversation with a very prominent leftist academic, Todd McGowan. He's friends with Zizek, and I realized a lot of the divide is about how we frame desire, and they frame desire totally differently. And it's really interesting. And if you don't mind, I just want to kind of, because I want you guys to look into this, because I think you guys would have really interesting insights on it. I'm going to use, when I say the left or them, I'm mainly calling it like the Zizekian type leftist, which is, they're very smart, very intelligent people, and I think they have something to offer, even if it's an opposition that I'm creating a prescriptive, negating kind of what they're saying. But they believe that desire comes from what they would call lack. And what lack is once we discover language, we realize that we are empty subjects, that basically there is no real purpose for our being, where there's nothing there which guides our choices. And that what we have is we have this object of desire. This was something Lacan talks about, which we believe that if we attain this object of desire, we will attain a fullness that of our subjectivity that we don't have intrinsically, because we are intrinsically empty subjects, but that we create these fantasies around the idea that if we get this one thing, we can be full, we can fill that void within ourselves, and that is the source of desire. So for them, the role of fantasy and of attaining power is all a lie, and it's all an illusion based on the premise that we are lying to ourselves that we can attain that object of desire, and we can take our empty subjectivity and make it full once again. But that because that's a lie, our prescriptive shouldn't be based on pursuing power or really finding the maximal expression of our desire, but that instead we should try to sublimate that aggressive energy, and we should use violence inward and try to illuminate the internal contradictions within us. So basically, deconstruction will look at the family structure and say it's bad because it imposes unnecessary hierarchy, which suppresses women and oppresses their ability to express themselves, yada, yada, yada. That's kind of where that comes from. And I think the problem is it's kind of this universal view of the human experience that's just not true. Like it's kind of cope that I think that a lot of the people that think this way because they are who they are. It's perspectival in the Nietzschean sense. If you look at Eastern philosophies, they don't view what Lacan would call lack as necessarily bad. They see the void as something actually positive because it's a kind of empty slate.
Potential.
Exactly. It's potential. And the Nietzschean view of desire is an excess, that once we have an excess of strength, of power, we wish to express it and we wish to see it get recognized. I kind of said that strength is something like I can bench 315, but until I'm benching 315 next to my boy who can only bench, I can't bench 315 yet, but I will eventually. Like if my boy's benching 285, I'm benching a little bit more than them. Power does kind of need recognition, but not in a Hegelian sense where there's a logocentric dialectic to it, but it's more so a phenomenal thing. Power requires recognition against others. And so what I'm getting at here is because they view desire as this false fantasy, and because somebody like Nietzsche would view desire as actually the motor of our becoming, that creative endeavors come out of this constant striving, and something like eternal recurrence is viewing this cycle of repetitions in a positive light. It's like, yeah, I'll never be full, but the whole point of amor fati, the love of one's fate, is the love of never being full, of knowing I'll always have another summit to climb up, and yes, I'll have to descend, but I'm going to ascend again. So I just think it's interesting in how we view desire, because I know I'm droning, so I apologize. The last thing I'll say is the Žižekians, they believe you should turn your violence inward, and they use the example of Fight Club. What this does is what Nietzsche says: in times of peace, the warlike man destroys himself. You have to say that everything, your natural human desires are wrong. Your natural desire to dominate life, to assert yourself, to impose hierarchies at times, to recognize your power against others, that's bad, and you have to suppress it and you have to redirect it inwards. And all that does is that destroys you internally, and it creates this amalgamated psychology, which is very unhealthy and very life-denying. So I know that's a little bit long-winded, but I think it's important to recognize the fundamental difference of how we view desire. And you see this in how people I don't believe the left and right are like it's just a clear binary, but so far as you could call it two camps, it's how you view desire and how you view the pursuit of power and how you view becoming. And I think it's very pertinent when we see how people end up building their aesthetic political visions. It's totally based on this difference of desire. I don't know if you agree or have thoughts. I'm sorry if it was long-winded.
No, that's great. Do you want to go first, Dane? I've got a couple thoughts.
Yeah, I can go first. I mean, kind of begs the question, why do we have desire? And I'm not saying in like a philosophical or theological sense. I'm talking strictly biologically here. And this is probably one of my favorite things from BAM, is this idea of life being a struggle for space down to the cellular level. If you're going to go strict evolution, there is no spiritual, what have you. Life itself is desire in a sense. It's a cell wants to pass on its DNA. It wants to split. It has to feed itself to get bigger and to split. And if there's other cells, they are competitors to be absorbed or what have you. And that's kind of the driving force of all biological life. And so for humans, if you're going to say that we're evolutionarily tuned creatures, desire is a product of that. We want to have these things because it helped us, because it's what we did to survive and to thrive. And that's, so it kind of becomes, it's like, are you going to take the motor out of the machine? What happens to the machine then? I mean, you have to say then that human nature, as created by biological and evolutionary forces, is evil. But where is this idea of evil coming from if you don't believe in a transcendent morality, right? It's like, how can you demonize our nature if that's how we're supposed to be in the natural world? So I think there's a really kind of a disconnect there, and you have to really go through some mental gymnastics to reconcile that, if you're going to take a materialistic view and then also say that our desires are bad. And look at, I mean, products of desires, it's like hierarchy, power, excess is what has allowed us to build civilization when you look at it, kind of as we were just talking about. So I think there's a lot of, it's an interesting perspective for sure, but I think it's fundamentally flawed at that level. Jonas, you go ahead.
I was just curious about getting some clarity from one thing. You mentioned the leftist point of view of love, and this idea that it stems from a lack, because like reminds me of like in Plato's Symposium, Socrates is talking about what he learned from his teacher Diotima about how like the relationship between Eros and Aphrodite and that whole sort of thing. And his ultimate conclusion is that love stems from a lack, or like love is a desire that stems from a lack. And I was curious, were you saying that that's the leftist view, or are you saying that this is the view that both are based off of, but the left interprets differently?
So it's a different kind of lack. So with Plato, Eros is one. It's actually one of the most predominant methods of attaining the good or the beautiful, right, in the world of forms. So there is a fundamental fullness that can be achieved. So when lack in that sense is lack for something that actually exists.
Right.
Whereas in the Lacanian, Zizek'ian terminology, lack is more so that we lack something that doesn't exist. So we lack a fullness of being that intrinsically doesn't exist. So therefore, with Plato, you can use Eros as an instrument of returning to that ideal, whereas with them, that ideal would be a fantasy. And, and it's interesting, not to, just a quick point that's important, their whole perspective on, for example, how you would view the friend-enemy distinction. They view the enemy as more so a cope that we have because we want to believe that if we got rid of an enemy, our lives would be perfect. So that's the cope that they try to give the right-wing people. Whereas it's like, no, when I have an enemy, it's not just like because I think I get rid of the enemy, things will be perfect. It's just, I mean, that's just how life is. You know, sometimes you have friends, sometimes you have enemies. I don't think life would be perfect if I got rid of, you know, crime even. My life would still have problems even if I got rid of
it's
crime.
like, because then there would be the next thing that's like akin to crime, or it's like, you know, you delete the threat, like, you know, tie it back to the Reconquista, you eliminate the Muslims from Spain and Portugal, and now you still have the Jews to worry about. And so then they did the same thing. They got rid of all of the Jews. And then they still had this thing where they were like, okay, well, now how do we secure our kingdom? We have all this power. And now you have the Spanish and the Portuguese, who are both strong kingdoms, looking at each other like, we're all that's left, huh? And it's like, well, we'll start to eat each other if we don't turn this energy outward. Age of exploration. They played it well, right? And I think that that's interesting, because I agree with like what you said, about the idea that like the enemy is something that's non-existent, or like the fact that that lack is something that's geared towards something that's non-existent and unachievable. I think it speaks a lot to the sort of leftist mindset. So I think it's a really good theory. And I also thought it was interesting what you said about these sort of like Eastern philosophies, and how they sort of also have this base idea of love stemming from a lack, because it's kind of one of those things, right? Like that's why the Symposium is so I guess like revolutionary for how simple of an idea it is, because it kind of like finally puts a face to the name of love and like where this thing actually comes from. Like, you know, and Socrates, when he's talking about it, or Plato through Socrates is saying like, you know, it's not just about romantic love. Like love is like, you love your health because maybe you've been a person who didn't always have perfect health, and you've always lacked perfect health. So you want perfect health. And then even once you attain perfect health, you still desire to keep it. And so therefore there is a love for the continuation of obtaining health by going to the gym, eating well, living healthy, all these sorts of things geared towards something that is physically tangible, something that you can have and will make your life better. And the leftist view is just so innately nihilistic, because it's like, well, that shit doesn't even exist, bro. It's like, fine, fucking go live in a hole then, like whatever, you know?
And if I could briefly add to that, I think it goes back to our thing with Marxism equals rape. And of course, I'm kind of being a little bit tongue in cheek, but there is some truth
memes
to that.
work for a reason. Yeah.
Yeah. And it goes back, I think, to antiquity and the mythos of antiquity is my whole thing is that once you get rid of scarcity, there is no Marxist end of history, because now you have to contend with the scarcity of love. Love is something that can never be synthesized. And this is actually a very good thing that Land does. Nick Land does this very well. He says you can never instrumentalize alterity. So alterity, love is part of alterity too. You can never instrumentalize these things of rupture that can't be economized. You can't economize love. The Romans tried to do it with the sanction of prostitution and marriage, but you can't do it because ultimately there is an irrational element of how we view love. For example, oh no, Patrick likes consent. Well, why? Because it's recognition of power in a sense. Power serves Eros as well, because it's a recognition of you love me, I love you. I'm not paying you to have sex, or I'm not forcing you to have sex. It's a recognition that's necessary, and that's irrational. Because why shouldn't I just be okay paying a woman for sex? Because it's like I get the same fix, but it's irrational because I want them to love me back. It's recognition, and it goes back actually to both the Theogony and also Dionysica by Jonas. So in the Theogony, basically Eros is defined as love, but it's defined as this thing which unnerves the wise counsel of the gods, meaning that even the all-powerful gods are susceptible to Eros. And in Dionysica, Zeus, and by the way, in Theogony, Aphrodite is actually the daughter of Uranus, so she's like a sister.
They mentioned this in Plato's Symposium as well. There's two different Aphrodites, and you have to know which one you're talking about. Yeah,
right. And the one in Theogony is the daughter of Uranus, and she basically from birth, Desire and Eros walk alongside her. She's actually created from the testicles of Uranus when Kronos cuts it off with a scythe. But so there's that one. And I think it's still the same Aphrodite. It's just there's different ontology of them. The ontology in different mythos, for example, Dionysica's is that, or Nonus's is that she is the daughter of Zeus. And in Dionysica, Zeus is trying to sleep with Aphrodite. So this represents power trying to subordinate Eros, but she outruns him. He can't capture her. So what does he do? He tries to marry her off to Hephaestus, his son. And that's, again, trying to economize Eros, trying to instrumentalize it.
She doesn't love him.
Exactly. But who does she love? She loves Ares. And Ares is one of the only gods in Greek mythology who is noted not to have raped a woman. And on top of that,
he doesn't need to. He's too powerful.
Right. And on top of that, though, he gets revenge on Poseidon's child when he rapes his daughter. So it's interesting because I think it kind of goes in. So I'm going to do a whole philosophical thing about the dialectic of Venus and Mars as how we ought to approach life. So we ought to worship Venus, but as a lover rather than as a god or as a subordinate. We are Mars, and we have to have a relationship with alterity, knowing we can never control it. We kind of have to surf the Kali Yuga in a sense, ride the tiger, and that you need a reciprocal relationship. And that's always going to exist. The irrational of alterity as Eros is always going to exist no matter how much we try to economize it. And this is something Land gets right early on, and now he kind of has coped with like, oh, alterity is artificial intelligence. We're all doomed. Not just cope. But he was right early on.
How do you spell this term, alterity?
Yeah, Altierit. So it just kind of means like the other or the outside. But his whole thing is that Immanuel Kant, is basically the most important thinker of the Enlightenment and everything that comes out of it, because he tries to excise noumenon, so the world of forms, the ideal, things as they are, from epistemological inquiry, because he famously says, let's just deal with phenomenon. And what that does is it tries to instrumentalize and economize alterity by keeping it outside what's acceptable. And so it's just fascinating when you realize the connection between all these things. I apologize for going on and on, but anyway,
no, that's awesome.
Studies. Yeah, sorry.
I like that.
Dane, any thoughts from any of you?
It kind of before you just brought up Nick Lane again, it kind of reminded me of our last conversation when we talked, about like the goon pods and stuff. And it's like, I guess with the economization of love, I guess my question, kind of tongue in cheek, was going to be, well, what if virtual reality could make you feel love? And that's a whole nother, is that real or not, or what have you.
There's no consent there, though.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's an interesting question. And, there's a lot of guys online who will like cope with like, say prostitution's like secretly based because, you're like just like using your money to get what you want, and you don't have to like, take her on a date, and it's like, that's just cope to me though. because
it's fraudulent power.
Yes, it's like
you're LARPing as
you're
a
not
powerful
getting
person.
that. There's something more you want, whether you realize it or not. You don't just want the sensation on your dick. Yes, that feels nice, feels great, but you want the other person's affection and closeness, and they're going to give you a fake version of that. It's not the stripper doesn't love the stripper doesn't love you. I'm sure I'm sure there's been points in history where the stripper did in fact.
Hey, I was in the Marine Corps, Dane, and I can tell you many strippers fall in love in Marines. Okay, so it's not 100% true.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
But the stripper
That's
doesn't
hilarious.
love Twitter Anon who paid for sex and says it's base. Probably. But yeah, there is this. You cannot economize love, and there is. I think Ares is kind of that aspect. Everyone says like Ares is like the worst god. You know, he's a dick. He loves war and killing. It's like he's always made like the kind of bad guy. But you bring up a good point there. He's the one that has like a beautiful romantic love with Aphrodite, and he doesn't need to deceive her or force himself upon her. She willingly and wantingly wants to be with him, and it's reciprocal there. So kind of a fascinating way at looking, and he's of course the embodiment of a lot of violence and things, but he's not the one to take love violently. So
you know, it goes back to I think it's in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where there is more wisdom in your body than in the deepest philosophy, and wisdom loves a warrior. So if we could kind of equate that, Aphrodite is like wisdom, and she loves a warrior. She loves Ares. That's what we got to be. So it's all beautiful stuff. But you know, we're coming up on the 2-minute mark. We've covered a lot of great stuff. So I kind of want to give you guys an opportunity to shill some of the new stuff that you guys got going on, and kind of, you know, talk about the projects y'all are putting forward.
Yeah. So like Dane said earlier, we have the Sea People Summer merch. We commissioned our good friend Nikiforos to create this awesome design. He is really good with like the sort of like Frazetta-esque kind of, you know, darker imagery, and doing something like a vaporwave Sea People's, you know, design was like kind of outside his wheelhouse. But I think that the connection of it and the sort of blending of the two styles is what made something really unique. And we're really stoked on the design. So those are live now. If you guys want to go check those out, we've got 2 different fits. There's kind of like the heavier cotton, you know, shirt, the comfort colors. And then we also have this Bella canvas, which is kind of like a more fitted style. So whatever you like, we highly recommend turning them into cutoffs, kind of like this guy right here, you know? So yeah, so those are live. We've got the Barbarian Banter podcast, comes out every Sunday. New episodes every Sunday, and we're going to be in Kyrgyzstan together, and we will also be filming the Barbarian Banter podcast live from the Eurasian steppe, maybe even on horseback. We'll see what technology allows.
Yes, that is the big thing coming up for us. As Jonas said, the merch drop, Sea People Summer, very cool. And also it's just cool to commission an artist to make something, a work of art, in a time when things are so, you know, we could have just generated it with Chat GPT, called it good, slapped it on the shirt.
Would have been a lot cheaper.
But yes, the Kyrgyzstan is going to be our big venture in a life-defining moment for both of us. So look out for that. We aren't going to be posting from Kyrgyzstan because we aren't going to have internet for the majority of the trip.
Yeah.
We're really roughing it. This isn't it's not a tourist gig, that's for sure. But
you'll get to see that too. We'll have multiple vlogs and documentaries coming out, and it's going to be everything's going to be documented.
So that's the big thing. And so yeah, that's what we've got going on.
I'm super excited to see what happens. I'm kind of like jealous. I wish I could go, but
we'll bring you back a souvenir of some sort.
Please. Yeah, I would love that. And yeah,
not to spoil too much, but we do already kind of have like a little bit of another excursion in the works that we're trying to get ironed out. And I've just gotten word that the resources have, for the most part, been acquired, And it's one that I'll announce once it gets closer to the actual date, but we'll have to have you there for sure.
Absolutely. I'm with you guys. I'd love to do it. Last thing I'll say before we close things off, obviously, one of the final messages of Bronze Age mindset is that we're approaching a piratical age. And people like Curtis Yarvin talk about these patchworks of small city-states vying for customers to come and live there. So my last question is, what can we learn from the Sea Peoples if we are going towards this piratical age? Is our age of gold about to collapse, and are we about to return to this more virile form of life?
It's a good question.
You go ahead.
Okay. Well, everybody has just seen the new Odyssey movie that's come out, or you've at least seen people like myself talking about it. I think that one of the most sort of pertinent things that Nolan did to the ending was he made Odysseus leave because of this sort of collapse that's going on around him. And I don't think that that was necessarily a sort of exile. He can't go home because he's too destroyed by what he has become and this sort of self-hating thing. I think what it's really going to be is society is collapsing, and it's being caused by the masses in this sort of democratic fashion, but it's going to be the heroes. It's going to be the Nietzschean Übermensch. It's going to be those who can withstand the collapse, recognize it, and rise above it, who are going to come out on top, who are going to be able to sail the high seas and literally surf the Kali Yuga. And I think that what Sea People Summer teaches us is that you either conquer or you be conquered. And so I think that, get your fitness right, get your health right, get your mind right, get your spirit right, and go sail the high seas, surf the Kali Yuga.
What are the Sea Peoples but pirates, right? What are they but the Choreos on sea? It's you get your friends, you're all skilled together, and then you take the chance. The Sea People won some, they lost some. That is the game of life. So I think taking that brotherhood, that martial spirit, and that willingness to take the risk is what is going to help distinguish you from the average person as we enter a sort of collapse. They say that, the Bronze Age collapse and the collapse of the Western Roman Empire weren't dark ages for the heroes. They were heroic ages for those who could rise to the occasion.
Yes.
So that, I think, we can learn from Sea People Summer.
And if there's anything we can learn from this entire podcast, is that barbarian-maxxing means respecting women. We respect women here. We love women. Simping is based.
Second base to respect women.
Yeah, not simping.
Don't call them foids.
Exactly. Yeah, please, guys, stop calling these women foids.
No, you just got to be powerful enough to the point where you don't have to worry about whether or not it's cool to respect women.
Based.
Ares could call Aphrodite a foid, and she would respect that.
In the bedroom, at least, But anyway, before we go, I pointed this out to Dane before you hopped on the call. We're all wearing tank tops, which is pretty cool because I don't think we planned that. So we got to do a physique check. Z's music playing in the background.
Yeah, you gotta overload Z's.
I gotta add that in the editing. Yes. But it was great to talk to you both. Great to talk to Dane again. Great to make a new friend in Jonas here. Hopefully,
you as well, man. That was incredible. And you were like an extremely bright guy. It was super fun to talk to you.
I appreciate that. And hopefully I can have you guys both back on the channel again. And we'll have Sea People Summer, and then we'll have a Votan Winter or some shit. I don't know. Something crazy. Okay. But thank you, Legionaries, for watching. If you made it this far, you will have a Roman eagle delivered to you by doorstep. A little AI kitten with a propeller hat is going to deliver it to you. But thank you for watching. Go check out Barbarian Banter and go buy Sea People Summer merch. I'm going to buy myself a tank top or cut it or whatever. But it's going to be great, guys. This is the Warrior Philosopher, building the foundations of the Warrior Philosophy. We will see you next time. Awe Nova Roma.
Peace.